Okay, we're going to go live now, and after Paddy, you know when the queue is to start, yeah?
Good evening. Welcome to all to the second edition of ReThink Tank Education Talk Show. Before I go on to introduce the panelists for today, I also wanted to extend warm welcome to all the attendees. There are attendees signing up from different parts of the world. And let me quickly introduce the panelists for today and also the topic for discussion. Today's panelists are, I would start with Professor Dr. C. Raj Kumar, founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University, Dean Jindal Global Law School. It is a great pleasure to have you, Raj. Welcome to our education talk show. Next, I would go on to introduce Professor Mike Ewing, who is joining us from Australia. Mike, it's indeed a pleasure. Professor Mike Ewing is currently serving as Executive Dean for two schools, School of Law and the School of Business at Deakin University. It's indeed a great pleasure to have you, Mike. I would now go on to invite Dr. Purvi Pokhriyal, Director and Dean, Institute of Law, Nirma University. It's always a pleasure to have you, Purvi. Thank you so much for being part of our education talk show. And indeed, my friend and a practitioner from Supreme Court, Mr. Sailesh Madhyal. It's really a pleasure to have you, and we are really looking at some interesting aspects from a practitioner's
Thank you, my pleasure.
You know, now let me set the tone for the panel discussion. Today's topic, we will be talking about the transformation which is actually taking place in legal education and also practice of law as we speak because of COVID-19. I was reading a very, I would say, disturbing story today, which was actually listed in Guardian newspaper, and this was actually pertaining to Australia. That Australia actually recruits 560,000 international students visit Australia every year. And today's Guardian news story says that international students, many of them who could not go back, are now queuing up in front of what is called as, food tents and restaurants which are actually serving food for free. Mike, my question would be to you, the first question. Now that many of the students who are considering higher education abroad know that mobility is affected, do you see students shifting completely to online education and not opting for F2F model in the coming times?
I don't think one can make a broad generalization. And also, we don't think of online and on campus as black and white or binary. We think of it as hybrid. So a lot of the students that choose Deakin are comfortable. There's sort of a self-selection bias. They're somewhat comfortable with online, and then they might migrate in and out of classrooms to online. I think that's for a lot of schools where the future will lie. I suspect that top tier Ivy League schools will be slower to embrace online. But, for a lot of schools outside of the top 100, we're thinking more along this hybrid model. Paddy, if that makes sense.
Okay. Raj, if I could come back to you on the same question, we just released 48 hours back a report on mobility, where we conducted a survey capturing the imagination of 7,000 students, and out of which we got a response saying that 48% of the students who were considering study abroad are having different ideas now. You have been talking and interacting to students. You have been, guiding a lot of class 10 and class 12 students. What would your advice be for those students, who are reading such stories, and to relate to that, what would your advice be to parents at this critical times?
Well, thank you so much, Paddy, and thank you to QS iGate for this fantastic initiative. Listen, having benefited immensely by international education for a very long time, and being also a very strong believer in partnerships and collaborations and exchange programs and dual degree programs and study abroad programs, and we have partnerships with universities around the world, including Australia. I believe that COVID-19 has posed an extraordinary challenge to the world of international education. I have elsewhere argued that this is the time when one should focus on stay in India and study in India. Despite all efforts by institutions around the world, the reality is for the next 1 to 2 and maybe even 3 years, the entire framework of international education needs to live with the idea of lesser or no mobility. So how do you promote internationalization without mobility is the most important question that international educators around the world are asking. So in that sense, I can only say, if I were to advise my own children, I will say that just don't even think about going abroad this year. That does not mean that you cannot pursue international education. There are numerous ways to do that. And that's one of the things that universities such as Deakin and others have done, is to promote the idea of online education, but also blended learning. And there could be possibilities of enrolling in good Indian universities, and then have additional qualifications in overseas institutions as well. So the sum and substance of what I really want to say is that this is quite a black swan moment in the history of the world. Nobody predicted that this is what will happen, and this will have such extraordinary consequences. And this is also a moment when countries around the world, both in terms of opportunities, in terms of employment, in terms of immigration, in terms of visa, in terms of aviation, so much has already changed. And this is not a time for, say, students from any part of the world to actually go to any other part of the world and do what we all understand as international education. Now, I'm mindful of the fact that this will have significant consequences, financial as well. And I have a lot of, let's say, sympathy for the institutions which are hugely dependent upon international student revenue. But unfortunately, we don't have enough mechanisms. There are many universities preparing itself for dealing with it. US universities are talking about testing every student who will enter, and then they'll do testing and tracking and tracing and treating. All of that is actually being discussed as we speak. But if I were to make a suggestion, hang in there, wait for a few more years before you decide to go abroad.
Thank you, Raj. That brings me to the next question, which, I want to ask Purvi. Even if students ought to be selecting to study in India, right, the FTF model pretty much may not work for this semester and the coming semester, right? And legal education of all other, I would say, subsets, is dependent on certain aspects of FTF model, like clinical education. So how is Nirma University preparing itself to, I would say, impart clinical education and skill-based education online?
At the outset, thank you, Paddy, for giving me this opportunity to be with all of you. Well, it's a very interesting question, and we all are in a very interesting time, and I always feel that crisis is a very good time to predict and explore new opportunities. And I'm so glad that almost all the law schools in India, they could try to do something in this last 2 months, imparting online education, exploring newer ways, training to the faculty members. This is something we live in the era wherein the legal education and the higher education is tightly regulated when it comes to India. If you compare the average contact hours, the F2F model is so prevalent that average contact hours in India is much higher than any of the universities abroad. So probably this gives us a time to reflect upon that. Do we really unnecessarily give undue importance to F2F education, in a sense that? So we have been discussing this thing about this ideology. In fact, in Nirma University, we also thought that when we talk about the attendance, which is something which is so great as per the Bar Council of India and the university standard we have to maintain, but is whether the students generally come to the institute for the attendance sake or for the real learning sake. So we also thought to have an experimentation with the zero attendance week. wherein in these attendance in these week, even if you come, your attendance would not going to be counted for your examination purpose. We are a forward looking law school. We have been thinking about this for quite a long time, and COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to embrace the model of online education. When it comes to the clinical legal education, of course, we need greater amount of preparation in terms of the faculty, because clinical legal education includes not only the sensitization, but is also about a lot of other skills. So how to impart skills and assess those skills through online is a real challenge, and we are exploring newer ways. We are going to have a series of workshops with the faculty members, and we are trying to develop a model wherein how to file an online public interest litigation, how to help to the migrant workers. Recently, the school institute had joined the hands with some of the NGOs and trying to work along with them. So it is a good time for all of us to prepare and explore newer models, and we are exploring as of now.
Thank you, Purvi. I'll quickly go to Sailesh. Sailesh, law school is actually a crowded place, but courts are also equally a crowded place. I have visited Supreme Court many times, and hardly, there would be space to stand inside a court hall room during peak days. I really don't know how these courts are going to function during COVID or post-COVID. Do you see a transformation actually taking place in the practice of law? And if it is, do you see it as a temporary, I would say, short-term change, or do you think it is going to be a long-term change as far as practice of law in courts is concerned?
Thanks, Paddy. There is definitely going to be a long-term change, but it's hard to say if that change would be in terms of the core practice itself. For example, you must have read in the newspapers today what the courts are doing is virtual hearing. And virtual hearing, at present at least, has not been, in my personal experience, has not been as effective as a physical presence could be. Where it, I think, would make a huge difference and where the change would be transformational is in the paralegal activities. And therefore, I think from an educational institution's point of view, a certain amount of training, as Purvi just mentioned, the training students to e-file a petition, if I heard that rightly, e-file a public interest litigation. I think in those aspects, that's where students need to be trained, and that's where a transformational long-term change is going to come in legal practice. I don't think the change in terms of what actually happens in the court, I don't think that's going to change very substantially, because physical presence does have its own impact. But just to come back to your previous question to the other panelists, if I may just make a small point, if that's all right.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
See, Raj and Purvi said something very important. Raj said that while going to a foreign university, traveling abroad may not be the right thing to do, that doesn't really take away from your opportunity to pursue international education. I think that's extremely critical. Purvi said that the crisis presents an opportunity. Now, India has had this experience. India has had an experience with distance education. Now, distance education was taken up in a big way and to a large extent failed. There were a series of judgments which, didn't recognize distance education degrees. I think this is an opportunity for distance education to make a comeback, because online education is a hybrid between distance education as it was seen earlier and physical presence itself. So I think that would be an important opportunity even for educational institutions now.
Raj, you're muted. Raj, you're muted.
I said on a lighter note, we have to rebrand distance education to be social distance education.
Raj, that brings me back to you, Raj. This was actually my next question to you. Online education and distance education in India for a long time has been a pejorative phrase. Whether the parents do not want to invest on online and distance education model, I would want you to reflect on two things here. The online education as we speak is going through a tremendous change. Do you see in years to come, uh, the institutions may also, like for example, now what I see is they're having makeshift classes online. The second step could be actually giving credited courses online. The third step could be actually giving online degrees. Do you see that coming in years to come, at least from OP Jindal Global University point of view? I would want to reflect from online degrees. What do you see,
All right.
where you're going on online degrees from?
Well, thank you so much, Paddy. Well, there are 5 challenges in any aspect of online education. I'll quickly run through it. First of all, the major challenges in relation to quality and excellence. Um, Historically, online education in any form, distance, and even MOOCs, all of that has always had a pejorative sense towards the quality of education that is offered. So, the flip side of that is, if you're able to significantly improve quality and actually promote excellence within online education, we have an opportunity there. Second is regulation and policy. Again, historically, there was a lot of skepticism surrounding education. Sailesh beautifully articulated that as well. But a good news on that front. A relatively conservative body such as the University Grants Commission, UGC, has actually in more recent times, for specific categories of institutions, such as the ones which have got, let's say, autonomy, such as OP Jindal Global University, or in our case, we have also the Institute of Eminence, we will be in a position to actually offer online degrees. And that's exactly what we are going to do. We have partnered with an organization called Upgrad. We are launching this year both the LLM in corporate and financial law. I know Deacon is also doing with Upgrad, and also an MBA in digital banking and finance. So there is that. So there is a greater, a regulatory acceptability when it comes to online. That will help. The third, I think, is we were waiting for, and when I say we, in many ways, the society was waiting for an extraordinary and unprecedented situation where online and digital is not a luxury, or for that matter, a choice. It's an inevitable necessity. And this is exactly what has happened in the COVID-19 context. Today, more than ever, the level of acceptability among people for online education is quite extraordinary. And we are very happy that we are the first Indian university to have got the QS iGauge Elite certification yesterday. But what it is doing to us and doing to others is that it is also hopefully taking us to an irreversible trend where it will transcend the COVID-19 situation and will become the norm. That's a third thing. The fourth thing is that, as Mike was mentioning, online should never be seen as an isolated exercise. It should be combined with different frameworks of learning, which includes blended forms. It includes part actually live lectures, to part even in-class experiences, on-campus experiences. So in some ways, you are in the online being the passive, disconnected, indifferent, isolated engagement with the classroom is elevated to something more than that. And the last, I think, which is important for online education, is that as a country, we need to significantly advance the infrastructure that is available for online education. I mean, we are all sitting here. We are still a very privileged community. Our students are privileged. The faculty members at OP Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Law School and other schools of our university are all privileged. We actually are able to run the entire university online now. There are 5,000 plus students and 600 faculty, and all of them are teaching online. But that's not the case with most. When we do a meeting, I mean, today we had a meeting with no less than the infrastructure minister by name Mr. Nitin Gadkari. He wanted to do the meeting in WebEx, and I tell you, it was unfortunate that the meeting just could not happen meaningfully, despite all efforts, because the connection was so bad. It was so terrible. So for us to take this situation for online education to the next level of efficiency and predictability and certainty and preparedness, we need to dramatically improve the Wi-Fi and internet infrastructure of the country.
Thank you, Raj. I'll quickly go to Mike. Mike, I was doing a search on Deakin, and the first page showed up 60,000 plus courses online. It also showed up Deacon has an experience of distance and online education for the last 40 years. Can you highlight some of the best practices? Because I think in India, online education has really not taken off. Can you demonstrate and exhibit and discuss and lay down some best practices online which could be useful for institutions in India to adapt?
Yeah, sure. If I could just take a step back, I agree with everything that's been said about the Black Swan event, and COVID-19 has forced a lot of institutions online. I do think we must distinguish between emergency online teaching versus high quality, well-designed, online pedagogy. So even within Melbourne, we've seen universities that are ranked above us quickly in 2 weeks go online, and a lot of unhappy students. So, there is a difference between emergency online versus deliberately planned online. So I guess we're what you might call a born digital or born remote learning university. The Act of Parliament that set Deakin University up in 1974 actually states distance education provider. We've never been entirely distance education, but it's always been distance, off campus and on campus. But that goes back 40 years. So off campus delivery is in our DNA. Does that make sense? So off campus delivery is part of our DNA. And today we talk about a concept called cloud first. We don't design for the classroom. We design for online, and then we backward engineer for the classroom. So online is not an afterthought. I think for a lot of universities online, they design it the old way for the classroom, and then they quickly PDF a bunch of stuff and load it up to a Blackboard or BB Collaborate or something. We've flipped that upside down. We design it for off campus, and then we adapt it for on campus. So the off campus experience is very much part of our DNA. And constantly I'm being surprised and challenged with new innovation. I'll give you a couple of examples. 5 years ago, we were doing synchronous, real-time co-teaching between Indian School of Business, Hyderabad, and Deakin Business School in Melbourne. So we had students at ISB in Hyderabad, students in Melbourne working together on the same case studies. 3 Indian students, 3 Australian students working in teams. That was 5 years ago we did that. 4 years ago, we pioneered what we call a start anytime unit, or I like to call it Netflix education. When you can start it and you can end it whenever it suits you. Now, when I was told about that, I nearly had a heart attack. I'm thinking, this is never going to work. This is impossible. How's it going to work? How's the assessment going to work? How's the teaching workload going to work? And yet somehow we made it work. So the notion that you have to do a degree, you could only start twice a year. You can start some random date in February or some random date in July. That's old school. How can a person sit around for 6 months waiting for some random date that suits the university? So, I really think we're at that point where there's going to be a lot more disruption. But again, like I said earlier, I'm not saying every institution on earth is going to be disrupted at the same pace. Your Harvards and your Princetons and your Oxfords, that they will stay largely as they are for a long time. But that's the elite. That only caters to the elite of society. What about the single mother? What about the single mother with 3 children who would like to do a law degree? We've had 2 single mothers with 3 children do law degrees at Deakin in the last 3 years, and I'm very proud of that. We don't just cater for the private school elite. You know, online is also an enabler. It democratizes education. But I'm not saying it's better or worse. You know, horses for courses. It's a continuum, and yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mike. You used the word assessment, and I would now want to ask the next panelist, Dr. Purvi, a question on assessment. Um, Many law schools, many universities, are thinking about assessing students online. But as Raj did mention in his brief talk, that infrastructure is not equally accessible by all students. Then the question of assessment could become tricky, right? What my university planning when it comes to or law school is planning when it comes to assessing students? What are the what are the new steps that you are building?
Thank you for this question. This is assessment is one area which is very close to my heart. This is something which I've always been discussing with my colleagues. See, one thing which we need to understand at this juncture, that we are dealing with Generation Z. This Generation Z learners always believe in autonomy of learning. So one thing, when we are talking about the assessment, can we have a unified assessment pattern or a system? That is the first question which always ponders, that always confuses me, and we try to seek different answers for that. In a sense that if I wanted to have an understanding of the human rights amongst my student, can I have a one question in a test and I can assess all 100 students in my class? Or can I have a different models of assessment? So we deal with the diversity of learners, the learning style inventories are different. How do we cope up with this individual learning path, of a student? So I think that it is a high time that we give the individualized assessment. We deal with individualized assessment pattern, and we do away with the traditional one question paper for all the 100 students, and we assess them. So when it comes to this question, I mean, I was just looking at the Q&A session. Someone had asked this question, that even for the online assessment, when there is a serious crisis, as Raj had mentioned, about the electricity and access to internet, can we find out, if in my class there are 100 students who are being, from amongst the 100, there are 80 who could appear in the test and 20 who could not appear in the test. Because of one or the other problems, can I devise the different tactics, different methods to assess them? So my point over here is that we need to come out from the standardized, unified, universal assessment pattern. One question for all 200 students, one question paper for 200. What we underline, what is our assessment rubric for different set of students, that is something we need to decide upon, and that requires a very careful, thorough analysis of the learners, their learning styles, and the content and our delivery and the assessment rubrics. So keeping all this thing in mind, I would say that this online, when we talk about the online education and online assessment, will give a different opportunity. I mean, altogether very new opportunity for the faculty members also to design a newer kind of an assessment for different set of students. If you missed this assessment at one particular day, on 15th you could not give an assessment. Okay, there is another chance on 17th you can give this kind of a test. So I think and we need to cope up with this on-demand examination, individual assessment. So I think online education and this COVID kind of a situation is giving a newer avenues wherein we can, I mean, I'm a firm believer that instead of having a face-to-face education, when I'm being able to have a conversation with individual students in a different chat book, that would give them a, personalized touch by the faculty to the students. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity in all we should try to embrace more and more. You are, please unmute yourself, please.
Sailesh, this was a question which we received on the website, anonymous questions. Okay. So what kind of students in terms of skills, personality, and behavior were actually able to make the cut in becoming a good lawyer. Do you see those skills changing during or post COVID-19?
Okay, first part of the question first. I think skills today are of a much higher degree or level than what the skills that were expected of students around the time when we passed out of college and were looking for jobs. Uh, First things first, at least that's very visible with the law schools and university, good universities, good legal education. The skills I think one really looks for in litigation, because I am a litigator. So as far as litigation is concerned, the skills one looks for today is very, very high degree of research ability and an ability to communicate. Uh, these I think are the core skills one looks for today. What skills would we be looking at post COVID? It's a little early to say because we don't know which direction uh, practice is headed. Whether litigation would embrace litigation through video conference completely, we don't know. But definitely one thing we do look at, we would look at, we have been looking at, and we would continue to look at, is an ability to understand technology and a willingness to accept technology. So that's something that I think was important, but I think would become even more important in the post-COVID situation. Technology, not only in terms of what you do in court, but technology also in terms of uh, how you prepare yourself, how you prepare to file something. I don't think in terms of non-litigation it would make that much of a difference, because non-litigation, the human interface was much lesser. Litigation human interface was much more, and now with that human interface being substituted in a lot of spheres by with technology, video conferencing, online filing, etc., I think those areas one would expect students to be a little more familiar with in the times to come.
Okay, thank you, Sailesh. Raj, I have an interesting question. This is again a question which I collected from students. Many students are asking, when the idea of legal education is changing, when the question, or when the idea of a 21st century attorney is also changing, shouldn't the current bar exam correlate to the entry level competence to assess students on skills where litigation could potentially be substituted to online dispute resolution? Your views, Raj. Raj, you're muted.
Thank you so much for that question, Paddy. I think one of the things which is always very difficult for any regulatory framework is to work towards catching up with the reality. This is not a unique Indian phenomenon. There's always a problem of regulatory bodies always playing catching up. And so in that context, while I entirely understand the context of why bar examinations and bar admissions need to reflect, let's say, the current realities of the legal profession, it's one of those things which I believe is going to take a lot more time. As you know, in India, the very history and evolution of bar exam is a very recent phenomenon. I have been admitted to the bar of the state of New York. I had practiced law there, and I took the bar exam there. Let me tell you, it hasn't changed over the years. Although the practice of law has changed, so much of arguably most people who end up qualified to the New York bar, if you're working at a different firm and things like that, the knowledge and expertise that is being tested in the bar exam, it has little correlation to what you're actually doing. So in a way, the answer is, most of the time, the way I look at it is that it is not the bar exam's job actually to look at what kind of, let's say, new areas of knowledge and expertise you need to have. A lot more has to change in legal education. At the end of the day, bar exam is at best a certificatory process which will enable you to get a license to practice in a jurisdiction. The substantive curriculum and the framework of the study of law needs to change. It's important for us to look at the changing dimensions of legal profession and integrate that to the curriculum and the coursework and what is being taught in the classroom. The second thing, which is also equally important, is that, you know, I think students are also, more and more students are becoming or coming into law school uh, conscious of the fact that they may end up not becoming a lawyer. And that trend is going to happen a lot more. Meaning, knowledge of law and even a law degree does not necessarily mean that you need to become a lawyer. In fact, a whole range of opportunities await individuals, outside the law, but their knowledge of law will be helpful. All of that, in fact, you mentioned dispute resolution. That's a very good area where there is enormous scope for people not necessarily to use their legal knowledge, but also others. And more specialized forms of dispute resolution mechanisms are emerging, and India has enormous scope in it, although you and I know ADR is still in a very primitive stage in India. Paddy, you're muted.
We need to get used to this muting, unmuting. So let me quickly go to Mike. Mike, the question is really important for me and definitely important for students. Many students are wanting to ask this question to you, address this question to you. Do you see the opportunities? When I say opportunities, job opportunities for a student, would it be similar when a student is acquiring a degree, which is an online degree? Because I see in Deakin University, there is an online JD program and a full-time JD program. Do you see the job opportunities would also be similar for a student, whether he's doing online or whether he's doing full-time? I would really want you to reflect.
So if I could just take a step back and talk LLB first, because JD is relatively, well, it's a lot newer in Australia. JD is still something that I think some people are getting their heads around. So if we start off with LLB, other than, the snobbery perhaps of the University of Melbourne or the University of Sydney, and some law firms would only want to hire from University of Melbourne or University of Sydney. If you put that aside, we would see close to no difference. So if a firm was going to hire a Deakin graduate, I've got no evidence that they would discriminate against an online person. As I said, we don't like the word online or on campus because it's too binary. We see our students drift between online and on campus. It's not neat and binary. So I would see no discrimination against a online LLB. JD, I mean, our JD is only 3 years old, I think. 3, maybe going on 4 years old. So it's still early days, Paddy. I think the Australian market is starting to shift towards JD to some extent. So I would hope there's no discrimination, and I would also say that other universities are offering online JDs as well. I believe ANU, Australian National University, has an online JD. So it's still quite, kind of early on in the JD product life cycle, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Purvi, I have a question which is posed by Gunjan. So she's asking a very interesting question. How do law schools cope up with the mandate for providing internships to students during COVID times? Because many law firms are not providing the internships opportunities, or online internship opportunities for students. I thought, it'd be a good thing for you to send out a message to law firms, by this question. Raj, if you want, you can also come in and add to this question.
Well, it's a very good question, So I know what is the purpose of internships, and what difference does it make in students' learning life when it comes to the internship experiences? So, in one sense, we can say that it is an experiential learning And through this experience, the students would be able to reflect upon that what they have learned and what they have not learned. But in this COVID-19 situation, because of variety of reasons, the law firms are not providing this internship. But there are a lot of online things, online internships opportunities which are available. And I have seen that some of the law firms are providing this opportunity to the students. This is one aspect, that how can you cater to the needs of the law firm research aspect, and how do the students engage with the research internship with the law firm? That is one. Apart from that, there are so many academic institutions, think tanks, and research organization where along with them, the students can go for these research internships. And this is again, when we talk about the internship, it also includes the self-learning. Self-learning is also a part of an experience which ultimately imbibe in them the lifelong learning skills and ability to learn at their own. So what are the different projects which, at times what happens in the law school, they are being generally engaged with the projects and with the assignments with the law school is providing to them. But what are the ideas with which they would like to work with themselves? There are so many questions that might arise in their mind, and they really wanted to, but they don't have a time. The 5-year law program is extremely burdensome to some of the students. With some of the law school is taking so much of assignment, project work, internship, so they are so much occupied. Probably this is the time when they may go for a self internship and self learning exercise also. So there are a few research they wanted to carry out at themselves. Probably they can do so, but when it comes to the real life experiences, I completely agree that it would be really very difficult for the students to secure this kind of an internships.
Raj, maybe I will. I'll come to you.
I just want to add that, you see, again, we come back to the very extraordinary situation that we are facing today. When we began this, when we all began to deal with this problem, one of the things that I told to my faculty and also to our people who are involved in the Office of the Career Services is that the key word is for us to embrace what I've called FIFA. FIFA for us connotes freedom, innovation, flexibility, and adaptability. So freedom, innovation, flexibility, and adaptability is our buzzwords for us. And so what we have done is we've engaged with the all employers and organizations with whom our students have, and converted them into online internships. Now, of course, we accept the fact that experiential learning opportunities, including clinical education projects, which require a more personal mentoring, all of them are going to be affected. They are not going to be the same. And nobody who can argue seriously that in an online internship is going to be similarly meaningful in all kinds of contexts. But now we are faced with a situation. And for that, when the choices are whether an internship can happen or not, then clearly we need to follow the FIFA. And so with that model, we have had many students getting into, and that process is on. As you may be aware, we have on our semester now in relation to our entire semester when we have converted to online. And by end of June, when the classes end, we'll have a July internship program. And I gather all of them will be an online internship.
Thank you, Raj. Sailesh, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, on internships, I mean, I just wanted to say, I think Purvi and Raj are spot on. Internships, there are two components, I think, to an internship. One is the experience of being in a law office, just being there and experiencing what's happening. And the second part is actually learning drafting or research or any of that. A lot of students today, when they pass out of law school, already have a basic knowledge of drafting or of research. Now, what I think any intern, or for that matter, any junior lawyer in a law office takes away from being there is much more than actually learning drafting or appearing. What he takes away is the experience of being around. understanding the stress levels, understanding the pressure that's there if there's a matter the next day. Now that portion is going to be completely missing with online internships. So I don't know how an online internship would replicate that, but I don't see the problem. I think would be in online internships or in online learning for a junior lawyer is experiencing the office itself.
Okay.
So people are, by the way, I will say one more thing. People are also very understanding. We have a special judicial clerkship program with the Supreme Court of Hawaii and another with the Supreme Court of New York. And these judges, every year they take like 5 of our students, and our students actually go and do this. It's an extraordinary program. Nowhere in the world, any law school has been taken by these, US judges. And I actually told them this year that, our students may not be able to make it for the summer. And it's difficult. And they wrote to me saying that, they are prepared to convert the entire judicial clerkship program into an online judicial clerkship program. It's, that's the level of, people are flexible, people are understanding, people realize that it will cause much more challenges for people to travel. So in a way, we have to accept that it won't be the same, but it's still important to do it, even if it isn't the same.
Okay, thank you, Raj. Quickly, I would want to go to Sailesh. Sailesh, what are the positives that you see emerging specifically to legal practice post-COVID-19?
Okay. First thing I definitely think is going to happen is we are going to embrace technology a lot more than we have in the past. To what extent it substitutes what has been happening up till now, I can't really say, but we are definitely in the process of embracing technology a lot more than it has happened in the past. Also, I think the number of lawyers coming out, if distance education or a hybrid of distance education and physical education takes off, the number of lawyers and the quality of lawyers coming out, I think would be much more, because legal education would become accessible. Resultantly, there would be a better feeding ground insofar as law firms or law practitioners is concerned for younger lawyers. So I think the biggest positive is going to be that we are going to fast track acceptance and implementation of technology to the extent it's possible. Where it's not possible, it's going to die out once the crisis tides over. But we have, for the last, I think, 7-8 years, been talking about a lot of things which never happened in courts. It's already happened in a course of 1 or 2 months. So it's definitely getting fast tracked now. Technology is getting fast tracked in legal practice.
Raj, that brings me to you.
Purvi seems to be having a comment to
yes,
make.
Purvi, please.
Yeah, I just would like to add one more thing. Since we deal with a different generation of learners, I think this is a high time that we need to use the virtual reality and augmented reality for the internship experiences. We cannot create courtrooms, we cannot create the pressure, but can we create? So probably this is the time which definitely give us an opportunity to think through this. How can we design the virtual classroom, how can we use the virtual reality and the augmented reality in the investigation of the crime scene, or dealing with the criminal trials? How do we embrace this change? How do we design the newer kind of experiences for the students, in this set of situations? Probably it is a right time for us to go ahead with these ideas.
I have so little knowledge on what she said, but one thing I can see is that the younger people, as she's right, when it comes to, let's say, entertainment, for example, gaming, those type of areas, we have already gone past this. So, and it has a lot of their attention. So maybe that's one thing which, necessity is mother of invention. And so when these type of situations emerge, at least it could be part of exploration.
Raj, this is a question which I really wanted to pose to you as a person who has studied law in different continents. What positive do you see on legal education, which is like due to COVID-19 situation? That's one question. And a related question that I also want to ask is, can we expect an online full-fledged law degree program from Jindal very soon?
Well, let me say this, that one of the big positives for all of us that at least I see has emerged is that it has helped us to question some of the most fundamental assumptions of higher education and legal education. And so when we are thrown into a situation like this, many views and perspectives, I'll be very candid with you, not now, but in a few years still, I was very skeptical of online education. But that's largely because of the old distance education model. And the last few years, I had the privilege to visit Australia a lot, and I looked at many Australian universities, how they have done, many of our partner institutions. And when you take online education next level, including online examinations and online assessment and grading, in fact, we are very, very delighted that when CLAT and IELTS and the entire law entrance examination system in our country has come into a standstill, because we have been part of a global examination system such as LSAT India, we very quickly moved LSAT India into an artificial intelligence remote proctored examination, which will happen on 14 June. Even today, there is no solution for anybody else in the examination system of law exams in India. Both the largest one, the CLAT and IELTS, are still struggling to figure out what they need to do. And I know for sure it won't happen easily, because the existing model of physical examination system that we are all used to, that has suffered a tectonic challenge. And the tectonic challenge cannot be met by simply delaying the process, as has been the case with many such examinations. So in a way, that is pushing ourselves and pushing us to the frontiers of innovation, even challenging our own biases, prejudices, assumptions that we have had. As far as the Jindal going online is concerned, as I mentioned to you, we are very delighted that this year we are launching two master's degree programs. The Masters in Law, the first LLM program, online LLM program in corporate and financial law, and also the MBA in digital banking and finance that is launched by the Jindal Global Business School and the Jindal School of Banking and Finance. We are closely examining some of our partner institutions, including the University of Arizona in the US, who have very advanced online educational platforms, and we are looking at that. So I do think that we are going in the direction, but one of the things which we should be very conscious of is that, at least we are very clear about it, we don't want to do anything just because we have a COVID-19 situation. We want to be conscious of the fact that the COVID situation has helped us to rethink and reimagine, and in many ways contribute towards transformation, but it should not be a knee-jerk reaction that is based upon COVID and will end when COVID ends, which it will.
Thank you, Raj. Purvi, another question which is coming on the Q&A, I thought I would address that question to you. Many psychologists who are studying online education have highlighted one of the most difficult aspects of online education, especially during COVID times, is studying in isolation. And a related question which Sachin is throwing on the Q&A is, physical teaching normally imparts education to students, but also grooms them for enhancing their personality. How do you see this in the context of online teaching?
I do agree that there is ADS, what we call is attention deficiency syndrome with this generation. But I feel that that happens with the classroom also. When I have 40 students, 60 students sitting in my class and the professor is teaching, it's so difficult to comprehend whether, I'm into GOG, whether all the students in my class are being able to paying attention to me. So, I'm always there in that, that assumption that, I'm teaching and they are learning, So this is, and when it comes to the online education, people say, I mean, I know, I have my colleagues, I have my friends who say that, how do you ensure that they are learning? They may be on, keeping their screen on, and they may not, they may be doing so many other activities. So how do you ensure? So this is a different kind of a challenge. And what I feel that requires a one-to-one personal mentoring online. That makes a huge difference, which I'm not being able to do with my 60 students in my classroom. But when I'm dealing with this thing, I can always have a private chat with all my 60 participants or 40 participants in my class. I can talk to them, so which is not precisely possible in the face-to-face classroom engagement process. So this is one. The second thing is that when it comes to whether they are learning or their personality development, I do agree it has certain amount of certain amount of challenges with reference to this. But again, what I feel is that it is a time for all of us to design. What Mike has said, I completely agree, is not an emergency online teaching learning process. It's all about well planned, well designed uh, sessions. So that gives this kind of an opportunity wherein I give different kind of an exercise. Like, if I talk about some of these things, I can ask the students to make a video, 2-minute video of the presentation, share it with me. I give up individual feedback on the presentation. So there are so many things which we need to sit together, think through it, and design it. And I don't think so that it can be any hindrance even for the personality development when it comes to the online education. I'm in a big fan of the online mode of teaching learning process with reference to as a part of not only the formal thing, but there are so many other skill development things can also be designed and imparted through this online mode.
Thank you, Purvi. Mike, this is a question which is quite important in Australia, but equally important in India. Um, the number of actually law graduates who are getting to law school, and eventually, not all law graduates do find a space in terms of legal profession. This is also a problem in India. The number of the significant number of law colleges, the significant number of law schools, the good number of law graduates passing out of the law schools. It's not everybody is actually having the skills and potentially becoming employable. So how is Deakin University trying to strike the balance? My only fear is if online education becomes the new normal, we're going to produce more lawyers, than what we are actually producing. So how do you see this question transitioning in Australia?
Uh, Paddy, that's a great question. And it doesn't only apply to law. As a cynic could argue that universities are overproducing in many professions. One that's close to my heart is my son's girlfriend is doing psychology. Now, there are far too many people studying psychology at first year. The majority are not going to become psychologists. It's just a numbers game. Our first year psychology class has got 2,000 students, and yet we only take 30 students into the honors program. So, how do you explain that? The same with criminology. Criminology's become very popular. What's it called? Forensic science. But how many people actually get jobs as forensic scientists? Law is in many respects in a much better position. Now, again, it depends on, is the glass half empty or half full? If you're entering university to become a solicitor, and that's your career goal, you may be disappointed. But if you've got a more open mind, the good news is that many other sectors of the economy have suddenly realized the benefit of legal training. And they suddenly have gone, oh my goodness, we need to hire more lawyers because they are disciplined, they are intelligent, they can handle pressure, they are analytical, they are methodical. So what we are seeing in Australia is the demand for legal training outside of the legal profession is exponential. And that's literally an awakening. As I said, other parts of the economy are going, oh, wow, we didn't think of that. people who've got law degrees are really, really good at X, Y, and Z. So that's the good news. I mean, if your heart is set on practicing law, in Australia, you've got about a 50% chance, because we produce about 12,000 graduates for a legal profession that can absorb about 7,000. But the good news is that many other parts of the economy have suddenly woken up to the merit of hiring a legal graduate.
You're
You're muted, Paddy.
If I can rephrase this question to you, Raj, you've been to US, you've studied in, different territories. In US, they have a very interesting aspect, right? Everybody who's a law graduate has to go through a very rigorous bar exam, and it's not the chances of people actually clearing a bar exam is much lesser. Therefore, there is an automatic filtration process of students actually getting into bar even after completing their legal education. How do you see it from an Indian perspective, Raj, at least in the coming days? Because I think this is also an important question for students who are wanting to know.
Okay, so the numbers in India are quite unique, in the sense we have 1,600 plus law schools. We have probably around 75,000 law graduates every year. Some data shows that we have nearly 1.4 million lawyers. So it's not that we have too many lawyers for a country like India. But one thing is very clear, that the pathways into our legal profession is right now only twofold, which is a 5-year integrated law program for a high school leaver, or a 3-year LLB program for a graduate. So we realize that there is one major challenge in both these frameworks. There is nothing in India in offer for somebody who wants to pursue a law degree, but does not wanting to practice law. Does not want to study a BA history or pol science or literature or economics, but actually to do a legal studies degree. The US has a number of universities. In fact, some law schools have it in itself, but most of the time it happens in another department. For the first time in India, Jindal Global Law School this year has offered the BA Honors Legal Studies. It is a 3-year standalone law degree, the purpose of which is not necessarily to practice law. If you do want to do that, you can actually come and do the LLB after that. But this is what I've always maintained, that law is the new liberal arts in India. And so if you really want to study, have an understanding of law, understanding of government, understanding of rights and freedoms, understanding of society a bit, and also including commercial arrangements and the relationship with law, you get into this kind of a program. And if you want to get out of it afterwards, you graduate, you can do an MBA, you can do any master's degrees. But if you want to do law with a view to becoming a lawyer, you can take that call. Now, this choice is very important for Indian students, because, as you know, in India, the 5-year integrated program after high school, 12th standard, exercised an enormous demand on the part of the students. They make that choice so early. And if they do end up making a choice which they don't like, then they have no option but to go through it for 5 years. And even after I've gone through 3-4 years, exit routes are very difficult. So I believe the BA Honors in Legal Studies is a transformative opportunity for young people who might want to have a knowledge of law, a bit of understanding of law, wanting to be hopefully understanding the legal system, and then to move on and that feel, this is not what I want to do as a profession. Or if they choose, in some ways, if they make a conscious choice to come into the legal profession, they can end up studying the 3-year LLB.
Thank you so much, Raj. It's like going back to the previous model which India embraced, that is a 3-year LLB program doing an undergraduate law degree, right? So, Sailesh, this is a very tricky question. This is my own question because I really wanted to know, do you see the fact that the litigation is going online? Do you see an impact on the professional or a service fee by lawyers? Do you see that the clients are not wanting to pay the same fees that they would be paying to the lawyers because things are going online?
I think it's too early to say. Because we still don't know how it's going to pan out. But it's a possibility, because a lot of things are in India. I can't really say the same about how it is abroad, but in India, there's a lot of opacity in the way legal practice is done. Let me be very honest. The client has very little idea as to what the costs involved are, and a lot of fees is charged in the garb of it being a cost. Once the costs become more transparent, it's not going to be easy uh, for lawyers to charge money on the basis that it's a cost when it's really not. So it's a possibility that remunerations, or at least the money earned by lawyers, uh, you know, is rationalizes. But I don't think for lawyers who have been transparent, I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference in terms of the fee they charge, because the service they provide essentially remains the same. It's just that it perhaps becomes a little easier for the client to access information. And if that information was always being given, then I don't think it would make too much of a difference. Just to go back a little bit, since you were talking about number of lawyers passing out, I think Mike and Raj weighed in on that. I think the challenge would be, from an end user's perspective, the challenge would be not in terms of looking at it as how many lawyers are passing out, but whether the quality of education that is provided, if there is a qualitative shift and a qualitative improvement in the quality that is provided. For example, today, if a Jindal or a Nirma university is able to take, say, instead of 500 students, if they're able to take 1,000 students, a lot of students who would have studied in a substandard college or a university with lack of facilities, they would have an opportunity to study in a much better university. So if the quality delivery can be much better, I think that would be a big plus and a big positive to come out of online collaborative learning, online or hybrid learning.
Okay,
I
thank
want to
you.
quickly add that I'm generally not in favor of pitching online education means it should be actually cheaper, because this is the worst injustice we will do for online. I mean, Sailesh was very generous in making the comment about the practice part of it, and there's a fair point about having greater transparency. But when you look at online, in fact, there was a very good Delhi High Court judgment recently when some schools, where there was a argument made about the fact that the school
Should they
fees
pay
were
the school
lesser.
fees?
And it was such a progressive, far-sighted, very thoughtful judgment by the court when it said, listen, online education requires a lot more work, requires a lot more resources, and actually expect a lot more from faculty. So in terms of, financial commitment, in terms of intellectual contribution, in terms of physical resources, all of that online takes a lot more. So we have to now think about how do we make online experience much more meaningful, because that is critical. Otherwise, we will end up having a mediocre online education experience, which will fundamentally undermine not only the educational objectives that we are trying to achieve, but also will create further pejorativeness connected to online education.
Raj, just to add to that, what I meant was that the capacity of a law school to accept students would perhaps increase.
Correct. I agree with you.
Today, a law school which accepts 500 students, perhaps, I don't know. I mean, you're the experts, you're the academicians in the field. But a law school which accepted 500 students might have capacity to accept, say, 700 or 800
Oh,
students.
absolutely. I agree with you entirely, Sailesh. In fact, your point about the legal profession fee is also, see, all of that is going to, people are now, the market will also shape this thinking. What do you pay the fee for? I mean, honestly, for example, one of the things that the physical advocacy is that there is a fee for a grand lawyer, senior counsel standing before the Supreme Court and making that argument. Now, if smart people are going to be sitting in, homes, and the judges are going to be sitting there in their own homes, and that sort of that grand advocacy pure standing type, oration is no longer so relevant.
Yeah.
Many clients would think, you know what, I don't need to pay for this person who is, charging 25 times or 40 times more than another bright lawyer, because if judges are going to be, in fact, it has the potential to change everybody's mindset, including the judges themselves.
You're right. You're right.
Um, so the one question which I really want to pose it as an open question to all the panelists. I know Raj has been a human rights scholar and he has written a lot on human rights. Raj, how do you see this entire access to justice scenario actually building up due to COVID-19? Do you think disruption in terms of technology as far as the practice of law is going to really help access to justice? I think all of you could come in. Mike, I have another specific question to you.
Well, listen, this is one of the most serious issues. A couple of days ago, we had a webinar and we talked about this issue in a big way. I will say that, first of all, I am personally not, I would say I'm even disappointed with the way the judicial institutions in general have responded to the current crisis when it comes to preparing themselves better for responding to it. I mean, I don't see any reason why. Of course, Delhi and the higher courts are doing much better, but India is not Delhi, right? I mean, we have hundreds and thousands of courts and other judicial institutions. We need to dramatically, have a better system for responding to it. And access to justice is actually a serious, essential commodity. I mean, this is an essential service. This is as good as a healthcare services. Just as doctors and nurses and healthcare workers need to be working for advancing that, I do believe that there's a case for lawyers and judges and need to be conscious of that. I mean, look at the situation that is prevailing in our, let's say, jails and custodial institutions. The incarceration that is there, which has put themselves in much more vulnerable due to COVID situation. So we have to seriously and quite substantially address this issue. Maybe this is our defining moment for it. And so more in his traditional institutions, look at, for example, and look at what we have in terms of data. Just a month ago, on 22nd of April, breaking 700 years of tradition, the UK Parliament was done in a Zoom Parliament way. Can you believe it? 700 years of tradition was broken where UK Parliament was done in a Zoom way. Brazil and Canada and many parts, US Supreme Court, for example, which is much more reluctant, had began its video conference-based hearings and also now slowly going more. I know that the Chief Justice of India and Justice Chandrachud, who is heading a E-committee, they are taking some measures, but we need to fast track it. We need to do more. And I sincerely hope it becomes the new normal. And this has the potential to be a game changer for not only access to justice in a more formal sense, but also to significantly address the problem of delays, the problem of the procedural handicaps, and also, the pendency. All of this, use of technology at all levels. My only condition is it has to be at the lowest levels of courts, and for which you need a whole range of ecosystem and infrastructure surrounding it.
Salish, if I could just, before I invite Purvi to reflect on access to justice, if I could, there's a question on the Q&A page. Now all the legal proceedings all over the country have come to a standstill. They're not functioning the same way it was functioning, pre-COVID. Do you see that is going to affect the career of law graduates passing out this year?
Yes, slightly disheartening answer, but I think it would. Look, law graduates would be recruited provided there's sufficient work. Unless courts start functioning to at least normal capacities, I don't see why fresh recruitments to the level that used to happen would happen. People would also be a little apprehensive about making big recruitments So they might just hold off. And unfortunately, I think this has come at a wrong time, because this is the time, or a couple of months down the line would be the time when recruitments would happen. People would join offices. To that extent, I think it would. Having said that, what Raj said about this being a game changer, yes, I mean, in the longer run, if this does become a game changer, and if technology to which the legal profession has been extremely resistant in the past, if it does get accepted, then practice does become a lot more attractive for young graduates. And in the long run, perhaps it wouldn't matter. But for this particular year, yes, it would affect recruitments, I think.
Thank you, Sailesh. We have another 10 minutes to go. So quickly, Purvi, do you want to reflect on access to justice?
Well, I completely in agreement with what Raj had said, that we have missed an opportunity to a larger extent. We had a greater expectation from the judiciary. But nonetheless, what I feel is that this is again an occasion to explore the avenues, because what McKinsey's report, if you read, it says 20% of the lawyer's job is now going to be automated. So AI is coming in a big way when it comes to the justice dispensation system. So we need to gear it up with this automation and technological intervention in the justice delivery system. And I think we need to have some kind of a task force committee to really to look into these aspects. And we need to prepare ourselves for when it comes to the e-courts, this is probably again give us an opportunity to we have been talking about the online codes and e-codes for quite a long time, but this is again, this situation will give an opportunity to realize it if we really focus our attention and we plan and strategize with specified task force group. So I believe that we need to capture this opportunity, and we need to reimagine and reinvent in terms of justice delivery system, and how can we reach out to the, what Gandhi used to say, the person sitting at the remotest place in the village of India. So I completely agree with Raj that India is not Delhi, but what we see in news television every day, India is all about Delhi and nothing more than that on a lighter note. But definitely we need to reach to the rural India to a great extent. We need to cater to the needs of access to justice.
Okay, I just quickly go to Professor Mike. Professor Mike, I had this question which I wanted you to ask you, but Raj did respond. But quickly coming back to you, online education, F2F model, do you see them as two different products, and therefore is there a price differentiation, or how is Deakin University dealing with this? Both online and F2F as far as price. Do you see a price differentiation? One, and with your closing remarks, along with that, you could close your remarks.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'm afraid Raj is absolutely correct. It's a complete misnomer to think that online is cheaper. Not only is it the same price to produce, sometimes it's more expensive. So, yeah, I think we have to break the stigma of online being inferior, and there's no evidence that it's cheaper. On the contrary, it's often more expensive. Yeah. Probably my closing remark, you spoke about access to justice. This last theme was around access to justice. The one interesting thing we've seen in Australia is access to healthcare. And coming out of COVID-19, probably the biggest short-term disruption or transformation is going to be in healthcare. The emergence of telehealth has been phenomenal. Telehealth has arrived in Australia. It will be mainstream after the pandemic.
Sailesh, your closing remarks?
Well, from a practitioner's point of view, I think it's time courts and as everyone else mentioned, courts across the board embrace technology. I'm still not a huge fan of online hearing, but that's probably because the technology hasn't matched up to it as yet. If it can happen, it will be fantastic. And as far as education is concerned, legal education is concerned, just to add to what Mike mentioned, I think it's it wouldn't be right to look at online education as a lesser cousin of physical education. It must be looked at as a value add, and that's the only way would it would give us better graduates rather than people who are just able to do it because it's online.
Purvi, closing remarks. Purvi,
You're
mute. Purvi, you're on mute.
I just would like to say only one thing at the end to conclude with reference to the COVID-19 situation and the legal industry and the legal academia. I feel that this COVID-19 is a unique crisis and whose legacy will outlive its cure. So I believe that we have much more thing to do, and this is a unique, absolutely a beautiful opportunity for all of us to rise to the occasions and look forward.
Thank you, Purvi. Raj,
Closing remarks, I suppose, right?
yes.
Well, I want to say to the students who are watching this program, it's quite natural that you're all anxious about the future. I can see why you are anxious, and it's quite understandable. But I also want to say that those who are watching this program and those of us who are here, we are still very privileged. We are so hugely privileged to be in the situation that we are. Think about the extraordinary degrees of disparities of income and wealth that our society has, and the kind of vulnerability in relation to their life and livelihood the COVID-19 crisis has posed in a country like India. Think about and spare a thought to those 17 migrant workers who were ran over by a train when they were resting at a railway station in Maharashtra. Think about those millions of people who have completely lost their livelihood and are on the verge of getting into poverty. So I want to bring that into your imagination, because I know for sure the graduating students must be concerned about your jobs and your internships and your ability to do quickly well. All of that is important, and I'm not belittling those concerns at all. But all I want to say is that in relation to the larger crisis that many people in our country and around the world are facing, the inconveniences, the challenges, the difficulties, the uncertainties, even a bit of disappointments that each one of us are facing is far lesser. Second, I also want to say that this crisis will indeed pass. As we speak, over 100 scientific interventions, including scientists around the world, are working feverishly to find the cure and find the vaccine. Despite high levels of negativity that does prevail, I am confident that we will find a vaccine or a cure sooner than later. We have reached a stage where the Oxford University scientists have gone into the stage where that particular vaccine they have actually found has gone into production, and actually gone into production in India at the Serum Institute of India in Pune and 6 other places in the world. And the goal is to have 1 million+ vaccines ready by end of the year, by in fact August, September. So a lot of things are happening as we speak. But even if you're not so optimistic, we are looking at 6 months to a year or a little more, but we will end this situation. And so you will be able to overcome it. The third is, this is an opportunity for character building, for you to make your own contribution. This is actually a fantastic place and time for young people who haven't gone into college to go to college and make this as an opportunity for your learning. So much of learning can happen. If you're already a lawyer, this is actually an opportunity for you to go back to school, because universities around the world are perfect places for you to pursue your learning at this time, because when you graduate from a university in 1 to 2 years, world will be a better place and will be much better to actually receive you. And if you're already a lawyer practicing and you're feeling defeated about it, this is an opportunity for you to upgrade yourself, develop new knowledge and perspectives, and to make a contribution to that. So in a way, barring the poor, the marginalized, the disempowered, the downtrodden, the vulnerable, almost all others who can financially overcome this challenge are hugely privileged and should complain less and be more grateful. Paddy, we can't hear you.
You're on mute.
Yeah. So I quickly wanted to thank all the panelists. Thank you so much, Raj. Thank you, Dr. Purvi. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Sailesh. It was indeed a great discussion as to how transformation is taking place in legal education. And in fact, it is affecting law practice, and there would be a change. And whether the change is for good, and how students and how lawyers and how legal law educators are going to observe that change is going to be crucial and critical. Thank you so much. And this is a QS Gauge event, and we are very grateful to all the speakers today to reflect your views. And we will send a copy of this video to all of you so that you could post it on your university sites. Thank you so much. It was indeed a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Paddy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paddy, so much.
Paddy and Ashwin and QS for hosting this. Thank you to all my friends and colleagues here. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.